breaking news on the Alina Habba. I was going to tease and say, Habba, no Habba job, but I wasn't sure if that's okay. But go ahead, Adam. Let us know what's
Oh,
going on.
I think that's a perfect summary, Katie. And thank you for that very generous introduction. She has been disqualified yet again. Her disqualification at the hands of Judge Brand on the lower court level was unanimously affirmed by the Third Circuit Court of Appeals, a conservative-leaning three-judge panel, two George W. Bush appointees and one Joe Biden appointee, deciding that the Appointments Clause to the Constitution and the Federal Vacancies Reform Act still matters. And so that means the Trump administration is 0 for 5 on this issue. Alina Habba was the first Trump-installed loyalist in a U.S. attorney slot to have been disqualified, but she wasn't the last, as folks watching this know. Her successors in that company are Sigel Chadha of the District of Nevada. There is Bill Asalee in the Central District of California, and of course Lindsey Halligan in the Eastern District of Virginia. The Third Circuit's affirmation of the lower court makes it 0 for 5 whenever the Trump administration is defending these appointments that are not Senate confirmed, that are not judicially approved. Courts have said no every time. And this week, there's going to be another oral argument over another Trump-installed loyalist who has never been a prosecutor but was a Trump campaign lawyer, and his name is John Sarcone from the Northern District of New York. And this week, on Thursday, I believe, you have Letitia James going to the Northern District of New York arguing that the illegitimate appointment of John Sarcone should nullify his grand jury subpoenas to try to gin up an investigation, a criminal investigation, over her bringing two successful lawsuits, one against Trump and one against the NRA.
Yeah, and Sarcone, for those of you tuning in, his backstory is particularly outrageous. He's had some crazy-ish happen while he's been serving in that capacity. And, you know, Adam, I am old school. I like to print stuff out and I like to highlight, and I have my little flags. And what I really appreciated about this decision was and by the way, I did an episode that's going up shortly on my YouTube channel. So for those of you that haven't subscribed to the Katie Phang News channel on YouTube, it's a free subscription. Please do so. But there's a sentence here which I really appreciated, Adam, and it's on page 26. And it says, quote, "Under the government's delegation theory, this idea that Pamela Joe as the U.S. attorney can delegate all of these amazing powers as a U.S. attorney to Alina Habba as, quote, special attorney." And we've seen a lot of attempts to use special attorneys and Ed Martin and others, right, in this administration. But under the government's delegation theory, Habba may avoid the gauntlet of presidential appointment and Senate confirmation and serve as the de facto U.S. attorney indefinitely.
Correct.
I mean, it is outrageous to me, the separation of powers challenges that happen in this administration. If there was ever a time for us to go back to basic civics to understand that there are supposed to be co-equal branches of government, if not, according to Representative Jamie Raskin, who I recently spent some time with here in Miami a couple of weeks ago, he said, in fact, Katie, he goes, I beg to differ. He says Congress is more powerful than the executive. So the co-equal branch of government theory is actually is bunk, because Congress can actually be the one that promulgates the laws and the statutes, and the president's job as the executive is to make sure that they are followed in good faith or in faith, right? Like the full faith and credit, this idea also that the executive has to make sure that the laws are followed faithfully. The laws created by whom? By Congress. And so this idea that Pamela Joe, who really should be acting independently and shouldn't be doing what Donald Trump wants, thinks that she can sit there and say, oh, and we should talk about the Halligan reference here too, right? Oh, okay, yeah, maybe the appointment doesn't work that way, but hey, I'll make her a special attorney, and so I can give her all the powers of a U.S. attorney. And these judges are like, hell no. Don't pass go. This doesn't work. But Adam, let's talk about the Halligan stuff, right? Let's take a little bit of a detour, because the Halligan stuff We got Comey and Tish James' indictments dismissed on the basis that Halligan was invalidly appointed. I'm thinking this is a great roadmap for any potential appeal that comes from those dismissals.
Absolutely. And that's what, I had spoken recently with Dave Arenberg, the former Florida
Palm
lawman.
Beach. Yeah.
And we had talked about how the Trump administration, Trump DOJ kind of got off easy with Lindsey Halligan being disqualified because you no longer need to look under the rock of the grand jury proceedings and see what is crawling underneath there. The Trump DOJ got a clean ruling saying you didn't follow the rules. You can't have two interim U.S. attorneys in a row. And what made Lindsey Halligan's case special was, and not in a good way, was that it was the first U.S. attorney disqualification that resulted in the dismissal. It was the first one because she was the only person in the room, because she was essentially appointed for that purpose of going after Trump's enemies. It was the first ruling that disqualified her and dismissed both of her cases. Now, Trump DOJ isn't giving up in any of these. They keep appealing it. But if they knew what was best for them, they might want to let sleeping dogs lie, because let's say they were able somehow to represent these cases to a grand jury, find a U.S. attorney willing to take that action. Or somehow revive this on appeal, they might be chagrined to find that all of the misconduct that was described by a magistrate judge would come into the light. We still don't know what she said verbatim, what is lying under those redactions. And as I said a little earlier, Katie, this is 0 for 5. We will see if John Sarcone is 0 for 6. If a judge rules in his case that he was unlawfully appointed and quashes the grand jury subpoenas on that basis, does that grand jury investigation against Letitia James die on the vine? But the Trump DOJ isn't learning its lesson. It keeps there as I understand it. We have a trial coming up in the case of Judge Hannah Dugan. The new U.S. attorney in that district is an interim U.S. attorney following another interim appointment. We will see if there is a challenge in any of the cases in the District of Wisconsin on that basis. So this is yet another development in that story on what, as you pointed out, do we live in a system of accountability to Article 1 of the Constitution, which is the Congress? I did hear Congressman and constitutional law professor Jamie Raskin say that, perhaps on your channel. And he makes the point that, yes, the Congress is Article 1 of the Constitution, and that is why the Appointments Clause requires the advice and consent of the Senate. That is why when Congress passes the Federal Vacancies Reform Act, that the president must follow the procedures that are laid out by the Congress in that statute, and judges are holding them to that so far.
Yeah, and I'm glad that you mentioned a few minutes ago, Adam, that there are distinctions with a difference here. So, for example, the criminal defendants in 2 separate cases that moved to dismiss their indictments and to disqualify Alina Habba in New Jersey, the judge who was specially appointed in Pennsylvania to hear this, which I thought was great. It's clean hands, nobody who's involved in New Jersey, somebody who's sitting in the federal bench in Pennsylvania made this decision. That judge said, I'm not going to grant the dismissal of the indictments. Why? Because to your point, it wasn't like the Lindsey Halligan factual scenario where it was just Lindsey who went in and presented to the grand jury to secure those indictments on James and Comey. In this instance, these indictments were obtained prior to Alina Habba having been appointed the U.S. attorney, but her disqualification was a separate motion that stood alone. In the Halligan instance, as we just mentioned, Halligan went in by herself, flying solo her first time as a criminal prosecutor, and screwed it up so damn badly that a magistrate judge says there's 11 instances of misconduct that would rise to the level of a pretty decent argument on selective and vindictive prosecution, let alone violations of the Constitution. There's language on the very first page of this opinion in the Third Circuit, Adam, that says that Congress shows a strong preference that an acting officer be someone with a breadth of experience to properly lead the office. Neither Halligan, nor Habba, nor Sarcone, nor any of the other people that are the 0 for 5 that Trump administration has lost 5 times over. None of them have the breadth of experience to lead what are offices that require serious experience. It's not just the legal experience, it's management. Some of these offices are huge. They have hundreds of people that are working as lawyers and staff, and you can't expect somebody like Habba, whose only prior experience is losing on behalf of Donald Trump and being a parking lot lawyer, be able to do these jobs. It just goes to show that incompetence is the brand, and it's truly the feature, not a bug, of this administration.
Absolutely. And that first paragraph is so scathing. And it points out, I want to read toward the end of it, that
Sure.
that they've been frustrated by some of the legal and political barriers to getting its appointees in
Yes.
place in its efforts to elevate its preferred candidate to U.S. Attorney of the District of New Jersey, Alina Habba, to the role of acting U.S. Attorney, demonstrate the difficulties that it's faced. Yet the citizens of New Jersey and the loyal employees of the U.S. Attorney's Office deserve some clarity and stability. And what that made me think about, there was a filing that was kind of jaw-dropping that went before the court very early on, where they mentioned that before she was even disqualified, that the lawfulness of her appointment was on such shaky grounds that a dozen federal judges paused proceedings before them. They postponed trials that were before them. Again, we're talking in August. Before the August ruling, there were 12 district court judges in the District of New Jersey saying, hey, we might not want to move ahead here because some of these defendants might bring motions to overturn their convictions if they're convicted. That we're on such shaky ground here with Alina Habba at the helm that better not go ahead with that sentencing, better not swear in a grand jury and have double jeopardy attached, better not hold this hearing or that hearing. And we are now in December. How many more judges have joined that list? How many trials have been postponed? I'm not a District of New Jersey beat journalist. I would like to speak to some of the people on that beat. What kind of mayhem is happening in these federal courts across the country so that Donald Trump can install his loyalists to attack his enemies? Remember, Alina Habba, one of the first things that happened during her tenure was the spectacular implosion of the case against Ross Baraka. And pretty much coming up, we might have another case against LaMonica MacGyver. And so these are all with Alina Habba at the helm. I should note that in the case of LaMonica MacGyver, her case was brought before the legitimate part of Habba's term had expired, so she hasn't brought forward that particular challenge. But it shows the kind of purpose of these appointments playing out, that wherever we see this happening, Lindsey Halligan, that's, of course, going after James Comey and Letitia James. Habba goes after Ross Baraka, and she infamously made that statement, "Will turn New Jersey red." And in the Northern District of New York, you have John Sarcone using his first time out the gate with as a prosecutor to try to prosecute Letitia James, or at least at this point investigate Letitia James, because she brought 2 successful lawsuits, one against Trump, the other against the NRA. So that's the pattern we're seeing here, and it's playing out through what judges have found to be statutory and constitutional violations.
Yeah, and I want to stay on this for just a second because I do discuss it in my YouTube episode that's going up shortly on my channel, which is public safety has gone to shit in this administration. For an administration that wants to run around saying that they're trying to protect Americans, and that's why they're federalizing the National Guard and bringing in troops into cities, right? Think about how little federal prosecution is happening in the state of New Jersey right now, Adam, because Alina Habba just won't get the hell out of the way. And if you think about this as well, the extent of harm that is being perpetrated by the Trump administration in New Jersey is profound. These judges that smartly say, I don't think we should and can move forward until this issue is resolved, has resulted in a total pause in several prosecutions. And so I'm not saying anything about the guilt of any of these defendants that brought these motions to dismiss and disqualify Habba. But if you look at the charges that they're facing, Adam, drug trafficking, gun possession, money laundering, wire fraud, these are serious charges that,
Right.
yes, ultimately are going to go to trial because the indictments weren't dismissed. Think about how people are in peril in terms of public safety, even though the Trump administration likes to say that it's, priority number one. And that's why they send people to Chicago and other cities. The other kind of quick thought is this. It's, Adam, you mentioned how there's all these other kind of contemporaneous issues that are pending in other jurisdictions concerning these U.S. attorneys. We have had a defection of qualified federal prosecutors from offices across the country because they have to work under the operative guidance and leadership of people like Alina Habba, Lindsey Halligan, and others. Not only is there a loyalty issue where you have to kind of face a purity test to be able to have these jobs, but how are you supposed to learn something in that capacity when all of the people that you really should be having a mentorship relationship with are gone? And the reason why I bring this up is the harm is not just the present harm, it's lasting generational, decades-long harm that we need to appreciate. The removal of institutional experience and knowledge from these offices that span centuries when it comes to qualified prosecutors. Moving forward, who's left? Some are loyalists, yes, but I still am friends with a lot of people in a lot of these offices, from the SDNY down to the SDFL down here in Miami. And Adam, they are frustrated. And they are trying hard sometimes to, swim upstream like salmon to keep on fighting the good fight. But this has massive damage and hurt to these offices, to morale, and to just the ability to run these offices.
It's such a good point, Katie. And as a matter of fact, I mean, just to hit it home for folks watching this right now, do you live in the Central District of California? Do you live in Nevada? Do you live in Northern New York? Do you live in the Eastern District of Virginia? Do you live in, I believe, and I'll check this out later, but I think this is Delaware too. There's some uncertainty, although that district hasn't been disqualified. You should be furious. I mean, they're really, the Trump DOJ has made a determination that in order to go to bat for its loyalists in all of these jurisdictions, that they will potentially stymie at best any untold number of serious criminal prosecutions in order to keep the loyalists at the helm. So it goes beyond, and as you were saying, Katie, the kind of institutional damage to the DOJ, the line prosecutors who are frustrated about this. You mentioned the Southern District of New York. Now, that's a place where Jay Clayton is now serving with the endorsement of the judges of the district. So it's not quite an Alina Habba situation. But we are seeing Jay Clayton from the Southern District of New York going on places like CNBC and making very political statements, talking about how Trump was wrongly prosecuted and the legal and that the legal community stayed silent. And we're seeing in his district that he alone, Jay Clayton, has been pursuing cases like the unsealing of the Jeffrey Epstein grand jury minutes, when prosecutors from the line prosecutors who actually prosecuted Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell won't touch it. And as a matter of fact, one of the lead prosecutors, Maureen Comey, was fired inexplicably. Inexplicably. Yeah. So we're seeing, even in a case where the head of that district isn't so out of step with the values of the district that he can manage to get his term extended by the judges of the district, where he's not all out and Alina Habba, we're still seeing the replacement of experienced prosecutors with loyalists. Now, Jay Clayton was someone who, in Trump's first term, a prior U.S. attorney from that district, Jeffrey Berman, refused to step down rather than have him replace him because he said this guy has not had experience as a federal prosecutor and shouldn't leave this district. So this is a nationwide phenomenon that we're seeing. And in at probably about half a dozen districts right now, it's leading to great uncertainty over whether the prosecutions led by these offices can actually stand up.
Yeah, and I'll remind people that Pamela Joe, pursuant to Donald Trump's directive to investigate only Democrats relating to the Epstein files, has chosen Jay Clayton at the Southern District of New York to be able to head up some purported investigation. So the big test for Jay Clayton will be, how much of a loyalist are you, Mr. Clayton, when it comes to investigating just Democrats, et cetera, as it impacts the potential rollout of the Epstein files, which should happen in about 18 days, allegedly, according to the Transparency Act that was passed into law. You know, Adam, one of the important consequences of this decision on the Habba no Habba job front is the calling out by these three judges. And we started this Substack Live talking about this is a trio of judges. So on federal appeals court panels, it's normally three judges that are listening to the appeal. And in this instance, I will also remind people the Third Circuit is where Emil Bovee has been spending his time as of late, somebody who we all know very well. But these three judges, two of them were actually George W. Bush appointees. And I usually hate to talk about, Adam, which president of which party does these nominations and appointments, but it was a unanimous ruling by the three of them. There was an Obama judge and there were two George W. Bush judges here on this trio of judges. And it was a George W. Bush judge, Judge Fisher, who wrote the opinion that the other two signed on to. So it's not like these are activist judges that are just doing something to piss off the administration. They're just following the law. And in this instance, they're following the language of the FVRA, the Federal Vacancies Reform Act. And they're saying that Alina Habba is prohibited from serving in this capacity as U.S. Attorney in Jersey because of a myriad of reasons, including the fact that she had been nominated by Trump and yet not Senate confirmed, right? And that she also was not the acting first, or she was not the first U.S. Attorney, who I remind people as well, they fired her, Adam. Desiree Grace got fired as the first assistant U.S. attorney, even though the judges of that district said we'd rather have her do this job than Alina Habba. The Trump administration clearly trying to play games here and getting called out. Do you think the Trump administration will now try to get an en banc, meaning the entirety of the Third Circuit, to be able to hear this issue?
We'll see whether they go that route or if they try to go directly to the Supreme Court. It does seem like this is coming to a head now. This is the first appellate court to have weighed in on it. And to your point, Katie, it was a conservative leaning three-judge panel.
Yeah.
You had two George W. Bush appointees on that panel. And I hear you on the it's this sort of thing that it shouldn't matter. It really shouldn't matter who brought them to the bench. They should be following the law. But of course, every time there's a decision like this, you have the Trump administration going out and saying, oh, these liberal judges, these activist judges. No, this conservative leaning panel read the law and the Constitution and rendered the result of every other judge that has seen this, from every kind of from any kind of appointment route to the bench. They have all found that this sort of thing that had never occurred in U.S. history doesn't fly. You cannot stack up your U.S. attorney positions with loyalists who cannot get Senate confirmation or judicial approval and insist on keeping them there when they are successfully challenged. So I will see what route they take, but if past his prologue, this is not a Trump DOJ that is used to packing it in, even if they've been rebuked unanimously every time they step to the plate.
Yeah, so in this instance, as you mentioned, Adam, there is the potential that if they don't seek an en banc or everybody to kind of hear this appeal and they try to go straight to SCOTUS, I want to remind people that SCOTUS has to agree to even take it in the first place. And there really isn't an obligation for them to take it. I mean, it depends on if they get enough votes to do it. But, you know, the fact that Adam so aptly notes, folks, that it's the Trump administration is 0 for 5 on this particular issue, should be a huge red flag for SCOTUS if it were to ever contemplate taking this up on appeal. This case does boil down to separation of powers, and I want to emphasize this. The idea that Congress has promulgated and implemented and created laws that the executive must follow. And the DOJ, being led by Pamela Jo Bondi, cannot just skirt those laws to be able to install loyalists, even though that has occurred in this administration. I also remembered something that I wanted to mention, Adam, when you were talking about Congresswoman LaMonica McIver, who also is one of the first politically motivated criminal prosecutions that has happened in this Trump administration, Trump regime 2.0. Even though Alina Habba was lawfully acting as the interim U.S. attorney at the time that indictment was secured against Congresswoman McIver, the facts that came out as heard on the body cam video in Ras Baraka's instance was the fact that Todd Blanche himself, the deputy attorney general, called the head of, I think it was DHS or CBP, who was there at the time, Adam, I forget which agency, but Todd Blanche putting his thumb on the scale to effect the arrest of Ras Baraka also shows how political everything was that day at Delaney Hall, the day that Congresswoman McIver was allegedly, assaulting federal officers, even though, funnily, they didn't arrest her that day. And it took weeks for them, even though she was assaulted on video and we saw it. It's so funny, right? They don't bother to arrest her that day, and then suddenly trumped up, and yes, that adjective applies, folks, trumped up charges are brought against LaMonica McIver. I am a huge supporter of that Congresswoman, and I think we need to also make sure that we don't forget about her and Judge Dugan, Hannah Dugan, as you mentioned, Adam. As all of this news that's always breaking comes up, we should always remember that those prosecutions remain right now and that we should be paying attention to them.
Absolutely. And with Congresswoman McIver, it's such a good point that we found out from the body cam video, and the body cam videos are live. You can watch the on the orders of the deputy attorney general. And as a matter of fact, when the order came to arrest Ras Baraka, and that was part of the same melee that led to Congresswoman McIver's case,
Yep.
it was Baraka's case that crashed and burned and led to a laceration of Habba's office by a federal judge, really calling it a low moment for that office. It's a very important issue, and that's why I'm going up to Albany this week to see the latest in these appointments clause challenges, this time with the Sarcone office of the Northern District of New York. And the plan is, there is the Judge Dugan trial coming up. So I'm going to try to stop by there as well, because these are very important issues. This is who the Trump DOJ, Trump 2.0 sends to these offices makes a statement. And the statement is not, we're going to have someone who is at arm's length of us, faithfully apply the law. No. What's happening here is, regardless of what the appointments clause to the Constitution says, whatever the FVRA, Federal Vacancies Reform Act, says, we're going to push loyalists into these offices to bring these cases. So that's why I'm going to be on the road this week for more of the next challenge of John Sarcone up in the Northern District in Albany.
So as you guys hear, Adam Klasfeld from All Rise News on the road, going to where the battles are being waged, literally in those courtrooms, at those courthouses. Please subscribe and support Adam in the hard work that he's doing. Adam, it's always good to see you, my friend. Thanks for joining and being a part of what are now becoming really great Substack lives. The more than 2,600 of you that have joined us on the middle of the day on a Monday. It is December 1st, as I like to say, rabbit. The best of luck to all of us in this month of December as we wrap up a chaotic 2025. Adam, thanks, my friend, for your brilliance. As always, it's good to see you.
Great to see you too, Katie, and thank you for your brilliance. It's always a pleasure chatting.
Bye, guys. See you later.